So now that we have focused on what a monopoly is and how it maximizes its profits and the price it charges and its lack of efficiency and things like that, and looked at the way in which we regulate monopoly, we're now going to turn our attention to another way in which monopolies try to maximize their profits, and that is through the act of what we call price discrimination. Because they have market power, they can maximize their profits in this way. So in this module, that's what we're going to focus on. So, what are we going to learn in this module? Well, first, I will explain the meaning of price discrimination, define it, what it is, and then discuss why price discrimination is so common when producers have market power. So, price discrimination occurs not only in a monopoly market, but it can occur in an oligopoly and to a certain extent with monopolistic competition as well. Here is a video produced by Mr. Clifford at ACDC Econ that you can take a look at on your own time, called Monopoly Graph Review and Practice. So now we're going to look at something called perfect price discrimination, and we're going to define it. Because the word discrimination is being used, at first glance, this sounds like a pricing strategy that violates civil rights laws. But actually, it's a very common practice that we have seen all over the marketplace. So far, we've looked at a monopolist who charges only one price, the market price, PM, to all customers buying the market quantity, or QM, units. And we call this a single price monopolist. But not all monopolists do this. Now, let me ask you some questions to illustrate some common examples of price discrimination. If you and your grandparents go to Denny's and order the same Denver omelets, who pays a lower price, you or your grandparents? If you and your 6-year-old cousin go to the movies to watch Toy Story 3, who pays a higher price for the ticket, you or your 6-year-old cousin? If you buy a plane ticket to Washington, D.C. for a flight that leaves tomorrow, and your buddy bought a ticket on the same flight but bought it 2 months ago, who is paying a higher price, you or your buddy? Daisy and Donald, twin siblings, turn 16 and go to the insurance company to get car insurance. Who gets the lower rate for the same policy, the girl or the boy? Basically, price discrimination is when the same product is sold to different consumers at different prices. It happens all the time around us, and firms do it for a very logical, not illegal, reason, because it increases their profits, and they're all about maximizing their profits. So many, if not most monopolists, find that they can increase their profits by charging different customers different prices for this same good. And that is what we mean by price discrimination. I just gave you the example of the airline ticket, and they do it in other ways too. You know, if you buy a non-refundable ticket a month in advance and you stay over on a Saturday night, the round trip may cost you only $150. But if you go on a business trip tomorrow and you come back the next day, that same flight, same seat on the same plane might cost you $550. 2 different prices for the exact same flight, charged to 2 different customers. That's price discrimination. So it's the practice of selling the same products to different buyers at different prices. We've seen that. And so these are examples. I talked about airline tickets. You know, lower prices tend to be charged to people that are buying a ticket to go on vacation. They tend to charge higher prices to people that are traveling for business. When it comes to movie theaters, adults are usually charged more for the same ticket than a child attending the same movie. Coupons work the same way, because if you use a coupon, then you are charged less money for a particular good, but if you choose not to use a coupon for something, then you are charged more for that same good. So people that are spenders pay more versus savers who end up paying less. Or maybe a football game here at Rock Canyon High School. You know, parents may pay more for their tickets than students going into the same game. So price discrimination seeks to charge each consumer what they are willing to pay in an effort to increase profits. Because remember, if everyone pays the market price, there are many people who are willing to pay more for something. It doesn't mean they want to pay more, but they're willing to pay more. And so what a monopoly or an oligopoly would like to do is to charge a buyer not the market price, but the highest price they're willing to pay. Because if they can do that, then they get more profits. So those with inelastic demand tend to be charged more than those with elastic demand. But in order to price discriminate, two conditions have to be met. First, a firm must have monopoly power. Secondly, they have to be able to segregate the market. In other words, they have to know who the people are that will only buy the product if the price is lower, and who the people are who are willing to pay more for the product. They have to be able to identify those people. And thirdly, consumers must not be able to resell the product. Because if they can, then they could just resell it for a higher price. And they wouldn't be able to price discriminate, or they could sell it for a lower price. So those conditions have to be met in order for price discrimination to occur. Now, here's a tip to remember for the AP exam. Price discrimination allows firms that are able to charge more than one price to make profit out of what would otherwise be consumer surplus. So when they do that, they are reducing consumer surplus, because remember what consumer surplus is. It's the extra benefit that people get that are willing to pay more for something that pay a lower price than what they are willing to pay for it. And if you are charged a higher price closer to what you're willing to pay, then consumer surplus is reduced. And that's what price discrimination does. Here's a video that you can take time to watch that's called Spotting the Price Discrimination. I'm going to play it for you right now because you don't have the link to it on your own.
All is output at a single price. This is a true assumption where the firm is a price taker in a perfectly competitive market. But let us now put ourselves in the shoes of a scheming monopolist called Wally. Wally is now producing an output where MC equals MR. He looks at his demand curve, which is relatively price inelastic. Oh look, there's a guy there who is willing to pay a higher price than the price I'm offering, and there's a guy there who's even willing to pay an even higher price. So Wally thinks to himself, if I can somehow make these consumers pay different prices for the same product, won't I earn a lot more? Profit is the main reason why firms may practice price discrimination. Price discrimination is where a firm sells the same product to different consumers at different prices, even though the production costs are the same. It is also where firms charge the same consumer different prices for the same product at different times. Where people are charged more at times of peak demand, it is called Picklock Pricing, a common form of price discrimination. The reason for the higher prices charged at peak times is partly because demand is less elastic at peak times. Many commuters have little option but to pay higher rail fares at peak times. This is genuine price discrimination. But often, the higher prices have to do with the higher marginal costs incurred at peak times. With various fixed factors such as equipment, marginal costs are likely to rise as output expands to meet a higher demand. This could be due to diminishing marginal returns to the variable factors and may not be true price discrimination.
Okay, so there you go. And when we're in class, we'll refer to this video that you just saw with the Spot It worksheet. Now let's talk about the logic of price discrimination. Price discrimination is profitable when consumers differ in their sensitivity to the price. A monopolist would like to charge high prices to consumers that are willing to pay them without driving others away who are willing to pay less. And it is profit maximizing to charge higher prices to low elasticity consumers and lower prices to high elasticity ones. So the more elastic your demand for a product, the lower price you will be charged. The less elastic your demand, or in other words, the more inelastic your demand, it's easier to get away with charging you a higher price. So let's take an example. Suppose Lenny's is a local restaurant famous for their Slam Grand breakfasts. There are only two market segments that enjoy the Slam Grand: senior citizens and college students. Lenny's incurs a marginal cost of $2 for each Slam Grand they produce. There are 100 senior citizens who are each willing to pay $4 for a Slam Grand. There are 100 college students who are each willing to pay $8 for a Slam Grand. A single price firm might face a tough choice on what price to charge. Lenny's could set the price at $8 and sell only to the college students, but lose the senior citizens, and their total profit would be 100 times $8 minus $2, or $600. Or Lenny's could set the price at $4 and sell to both groups, but lose substantial profit to the college student segment of the market. Total profit in that case would be 200 times $4 minus $2, or $400. Or Lenny's could try to differentiate between the two groups by asking seniors to show a valid ID and offer two different prices to customers. College students will be charged $8, and seniors with the ID will pay $4 for a Slam Grand breakfast. Their total profit there will be 100 times 8 minus 2 plus 100 times $4 minus 2, and their total profit would be $800. And so it would be greater than if they just charged $8 to the students, or $4 to everyone. If they charge $4 to the students, or $4 to the seniors and $8 to the students, they get a greater profit. And we can see that profit in the graph below. You see the profit that they get from seniors because they sell 100 breakfasts to seniors at a price of $4. And so when they do that, that gives them $400 of profit. And then you can see that they charge $8 to 100 students. And so you can see that they get more profit by charging the students more and the seniors less than if they charge either one of those prices individually to all of them. But why is it that seniors are not as willing or able to pay for Slam Grands? It probably has something to do with differences in price sensitivity or price elasticity of demand. So let's look at this. Here's the result of price discrimination. Okay? Let's assume that we charge $10. Okay, well then the marginal revenue will be 10. But what happens if we charge a price of $9? Well, now the marginal revenue drops to 9. If we charge $8, the marginal revenue drops to 8, and we've seen this before. You charge 7 because you have to reduce the price that you charge to each person. But what happens if you're able to price discriminate? And instead of lowering the price for everyone, you still charge all these people the maximum price they're willing to pay. So notice here that when we charge the first person $10, when we get down to the fourth person that we're charging $7 to, we're still charging that first person $10, we're still charging the second person $9, the third person we're charging $8, and the fourth person we're charging $7. In other words, we're charging them, we're pricing them according to their willingness to pay. We're not reducing the price for everyone, which is what a single price monopolist does, and so the marginal revenue comes down. And so what happens with perfect price discrimination? Okay, notice how the marginal revenue that we receive is always the additional price that we charge to the next buyer. And that's how much our revenue increases. So when we are price discriminating, marginal revenue is going to be equal to demand. They will be one and the same because the additional revenue we take in will be equal to the price that the person is willing to pay according to the demand curve, their maximum willingness to pay. So when there's price discrimination, remember with a single price monopolist, the marginal revenue curve was always below the demand curve. But with a perfectly price discriminating monopolist, if they can do perfect price discrimination, then the marginal revenue curve will be equal to the demand curve. Here's a video you can watch from Mr. Clifford on ACDC Econ called Price Discriminating Monopoly. And here is the activity that we will complete in class that goes along with it. So here you see two different types of airline customers charged according to their maximum willingness to pay. So they're getting one seat on the same flight, but notice that business travelers are charged $550 for their seat, and they sell 2,000 of those seats. So the profit from sales to business travelers is area B. Now notice the marginal cost and the average total cost of selling this seat is $125. So the airline is only profitable by charging more than $125 per seat. But notice the huge profit they get from their sales to business travelers. But students aren't willing to pay that price for a ticket. They're willing to pay much less. But the airline can still charge them a price that is above their marginal cost and their average total cost of producing that seat. It costs the airline $125, but they can charge the students $150 and they're willing to pay it. So they still get at least some profit from the students. Then if they charge $550 to everyone, they would only get profit from the business travelers. But now they can get some additional profit from the students, even by charging them a lower price. And if they charge everyone a lower price, their profit would be much lower than if they charged the business travelers the higher price and the students the lower price. So a monopolist able to charge each consumer his or her willingness to pay for the good achieves perfect price discrimination and does not cause inefficiency because all mutually beneficial transactions are exploited. In this case, the consumers do not get any consumer surplus. The entire surplus is captured by the monopolist in the form of profit. So all of the surplus is producer surplus, not consumer surplus, if a firm can perfectly price discriminate. And perfect price discrimination means every single buyer is charged their maximum willingness to pay. So why would one group of consumers willingly pay a high price for a product while a second group of consumers is willing to pay a much lower price for the same product? Well, because the first group has a lower price elasticity of demand. It all comes back to elasticity of demand. Senior citizens receive discounts for many goods, like for restaurant meals, because they are more price sensitive. When the price goes up, they're very sensitive to it because their incomes often tend to be lower, and so their demand will drop significantly. Children are the same way, and this is one reason why movie tickets are less expensive for kids under 12 years old. People who are flying to Washington, D.C. for a business trip are less sensitive to price than a family of 4 who might fly to Washington for a vacation. Well, what makes one group more sensitive? Well, one might be that they have a smaller budget. Children have less money to spend than adults, so when the price goes up, they can't afford it. Adults can afford it better, so they're less sensitive to a price increase. So adults at a movie theater have less elasticity of demand. Children have more. One group might have more flexibility to change their plans. Seniors versus college students at Lenny's restaurant. Seniors, might be able to change their plans relatively easily and say, hey, if they're charging me a lot of money, then we'll go to a different restaurant. Whereas college students who are busier might say, hey, that's where I'm going to eat my breakfast, and even if it's a higher price, I'll pay it. Or there may be more substitutes. Vacation travelers can find other vacations to take if the airline is charging too much money. But a business traveler may have to make that trip for their business, and so they have no choice but to pay the higher price. And that's why different groups may have different elasticity of demand for the same product. So here we're going to compare a regular monopoly with a price discriminating monopoly. Here we see the regular monopoly. And you can see it charges a price. It charges a price where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You go up to the demand curve, you see the price there. You go down to the average total cost curve, and you can see the area of profit. So it's making economic profits. But marginal revenue is below demand, and it's only charging a single price. But with a price discriminating monopoly, now what do we see? Well, imagine a futuristic device that a business could install above the door into the store, restaurant, or car dealership. When a potential customer walks through the door, the device detects the consumer's maximum willingness to pay. We'll call that WTP for a product. And a sign will flash this price to the shopkeeper, restaurateur, or to the car salesperson. And this is exactly the price you would pay for the product, not a penny less. This is perfect price discrimination. Each consumer is charged exactly his or her maximum willingness to pay. Now, how would this work? Well, we will adapt the Lenny's example by adding a demand curve to this graph. There were two rectangles of profit that you see here, and the unshaded triangles above the rectangles represent consumer surplus to each market segment. But what if Lenny's installed this WTP detector and consumers were charged according to their willingness to pay? Lenny's would sell Slam Grand breakfasts until the very next person has a WTP that is below the marginal cost of $2. In other words, instead of two rectangles of profit like in this graph, the entire area below the demand curve and above the marginal cost curve would be profit to the monopolist. Perfect price discrimination ensures that consumer surplus is equal to zero. So this is price discrimination with two different prices. This would be price discrimination with three different prices charged to three different groups of people. But you can see that there is still some consumer surplus, but more profit is going to the monopolist. But if we get perfect price discrimination, notice all consumer surplus is gone, and all of it becomes profit to the monopolist because everyone is charged on the demand curve according to their willingness to pay. So notice also that because the last unit is sold where price is equal to marginal cost of $2, there exists no deadweight loss under this pricing strategy. Obviously, this device doesn't yet exist, although maybe someday it will. But some firms do try to get an idea about your willingness to pay before the price is finally settled upon. When they ask you a bunch of questions, they are really trying to find out how much are you really willing to pay for this. Have you ever bought a car? Or were you with a parent while your mom or your dad was trying to buy a car? Was there any haggling going on over the price that would be paid for the car? What strategies did a car dealership use to try to determine a person's willingness to pay during this lengthy process? So here's a tip from the AP exam. A perfectly price discriminating monopolist produces the efficient quantity, and there is no deadweight loss with perfect price discrimination. All consumer surplus is gone, and all surplus goes to the monopolist in the form of a profit. So perfect price discrimination takes place when a monopolist charges each consumer his or her willingness to pay, the maximum the consumer is willing to pay. Now, perfect price discrimination, realistically, is probably never possible. And why is this? Well, there's an inability to achieve it because it's a problem of prices as economic signals, because consumers' true willingness to pay can easily be disguised. We can easily hide from other people what the maximum amount is we are really willing to pay for a particular good or service. So a perfectly discriminating monopoly can charge each person differently, so the marginal revenue curve is going to equal the demand curve. Now, on this graph, identify the price that would be charged, the profit, consumer surplus, and deadweight loss. So if you did it correctly, this is what you should see. You see the price that would be charged where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but because the marginal revenue curve and the demand are one and the same, that is also equal to the price that would be charged. But every person will be charged along the demand curve based on their willingness to pay. And so price discrimination, as you can see here, results in several different prices being charged. Each person is charged a different price according to their maximum willingness to pay. It increases the profit to the monopolist, and that shaded green area is the entire area of profit. So you go down from the price to the average total cost curve and over. So you subtract the price, but it's all of those prices along the demand curve, and go down to average total cost, and you find more profit. You can see there's no consumer surplus here because everyone is charged according to their maximum willingness to pay, and there is a higher socially optimal quantity produced than what a monopoly would produce if it was charging only a single price. So society gets more of the good or service. So monopolists, even though it's almost impossible to charge perfect price discrimination to every consumer, they do try to move in the direction of perfect price discrimination through a variety of pricing strategies. And these are some common techniques for price discrimination. Sometimes there are advance purchase restrictions, such as the amount of a good that consumers are allowed to purchase in an earlier time. There may be volume discounts like you get at Costco, where you are charged less if you buy more of a product. And there can sometimes be two-part tariffs, where people pay two different taxes. So there are different techniques that are used to try to achieve greater price discrimination. This is an activity we'll do in class called price discrimination practice. And now we come to the end of this module, and you can see the summary here. You can pause the video and look at the summary if you would like, but it reviews for you what we've learned in this module. And this completes our look at Module 63, Price Discrimination.